Ryan Walker grabbed the phone out of Natalie's hand and watched himself destroy his entire life in 90 seconds of video. On screen, he was standing on a chair in the middle of a company ballroom, bourbon in hand, tie loosened, pointing directly at Natalie Brooks and telling 100 coworkers exactly how long he had been in love with her. He didn't just confess. He proposed. Out loud. In front of his boss, his HR director, and 3 members of the executive board. And Natalie, composed, clear-eyed, heartbreakingly dignified, had said no. But what she said next was the part that changed everything. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you want to know whether Ryan Walker ever got a second chance, subscribe and stay with me, because this one goes somewhere you will not expect. The first thing Ryan Walker registered was the ceiling. It was the wrong ceiling. His ceiling had a small water stain, shaped like the state of Florida, in the upper left corner. A reminder he kept meaning to call the building super and never did. This ceiling was clean, painted a soft ivory, and had a decorative light fixture in the center that nobody had installed in his apartment. He lay still for exactly 4 seconds, cataloging what he knew. He was on a bed. He was fully dressed minus his shoes. His shoes were sitting beside a dresser that did not belong to him, placed neatly side by side like someone had removed them while he was unconscious and treated them with far more care than he deserved. His head felt like someone had poured wet concrete directly behind his eyes. And the room smelled like vanilla and cedar, a smell he recognized immediately, completely, and with a specific kind of dread that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with what that smell meant. He knew whose apartment this was before he even sat up. He sat up anyway. The room confirmed it. Stacks of procurement textbooks on the nightstand. A whiteboard on the far wall covered in color-coded supplier timelines. A framed print above the desk, a watercolor of the Blue Ridge Mountains. He had watched her hang with a level and a measuring tape one Saturday afternoon months ago, when he had helped her move in, and told himself helping a coworker move was completely normal behavior, and not at all the action of a man deeply in love. Ryan Walker was in Natalie Brooks's apartment, in Natalie Brooks's bed, with absolutely no memory of how he had arrived there. He pressed both palms against his face and tried to think. The office party. Brighton Medical Systems had hosted their annual celebration at the Ballantine Hotel, downtown, open bar, catered dinner. The whole production that their CFO called Team Investment, and that everyone else called the one night a year management lets us be human. Ryan had told himself he would have 2 drinks, stay 2 hours, and be home by 9. He remembered champagne at the welcome table. He remembered Natalie in an emerald green dress, the kind of green that made her brown eyes look amber in the ballroom lighting, and Ryan had noticed that immediately, and then spent considerable energy pretending he hadn't. He remembered someone handing him a bourbon. He remembered someone handing him a second one. After that, the footage became unreliable. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, stood carefully, and walked to the bedroom doorway. Natalie was in the kitchen. She was wearing loose gray sweatpants and an oversized University of North Carolina sweatshirt, her long chestnut hair pulled into a braid that wasn't fully finished, like she'd started it and given up halfway through. She was pouring coffee into 2 mugs with the particular economy of movement that people have when they've been awake for a while and are no longer startled by anything the morning might bring. She looked up the moment he appeared. She did not look surprised to see him standing there. She did not look angry. She looked, and this was somehow worse than either of those things, carefully composed, like she had been preparing for this conversation since before he woke up. "Good morning," she said. Ryan opened his mouth. "Before you start," Natalie said, cutting him off without raising her voice, "I need you to hear one thing first." She crossed the kitchen, held out one of the mugs, and looked at him with complete steadiness. Nothing happened. Ryan exhaled so hard his shoulders dropped 2 inches. He took the mug with both hands. "Nothing happened," she repeated. "You got sick after the party. Not dangerously sick, but sick enough that I couldn't get your address out of you and Sophie's with your sister this weekend, so I couldn't call her. I brought you here. You slept in my bed. I slept on the couch. You were asleep before I even got your shoes off. That is the complete and total story of last night." Ryan processed this. He felt relief. Genuine flooding relief, followed immediately by the complicated awareness that a man who was in love with a woman should probably feel something more than relief upon waking in her bed. He should feel at minimum a small degree of disappointment that nothing had happened. The fact that relief was his dominant emotion told him something uncomfortable about himself that he filed away for later. "Thank you," he said. "Seriously, Natalie, I'm sorry. I'll get out of your way." "Sit down, Ryan." Her tone was quiet, but it was the tone she used in difficult supplier negotiations, pleasant on the surface, absolute underneath. The tone that made vendors capitulate without fully understanding how it happened. Ryan sat. Natalie sat across from him at her kitchen table. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at him. Not unkindly, but with that quality of attention she had that always made Ryan feel like she was reading a document he hadn't realized he'd handed her. "How much do you remember from last night?" she asked. "Champagne," he said. "The first 2 bourbons, some of dinner. After that it gets—" He paused. "Fragmented." Natalie nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "So you don't remember the second half of the evening? Should I?" "That depends on how you define should." Ryan looked at her. Something in the flatness of her voice made the back of his neck prickle. "Natalie, your phone has been going off since 6 this morning," she said. "I put it on silent so it wouldn't wake you. It's on the counter." He turned. His phone was face down on the kitchen counter, the notification light blinking steady and insistent. He stood, picked it up, turned it over. 47 notifications. Text messages from coworkers. Messages in the company group chat. 3 missed calls from his supervisor. An email from HR. Messages from people he hadn't spoken to in months, who had apparently felt the need to reach out at 7 on a Saturday morning, for reasons that were becoming increasingly alarming. And at the top of everything, 6 messages from his sister Carol. Each one progressively, more emphatic, the final one, reading. "Ryan, what on earth did you do last night?" He unlocked the phone. He opened the group chat first. The most recent message was from Marcus in accounts receivable sent at 2 in the morning. "History was made tonight. Somebody buy this man a water and a sandwich." Above that from Dana in HR. "Okay, I need everyone to remember that what happens at company events is still subject to company policy. Just FYI, no official statement yet. Just a reminder that exists above that a video." 15 coworkers had sent him the same video. Ryan set his coffee down. He pressed play. The footage was shot on someone's phone, slightly shaky. Ballroom lighting, the ambient noise of 200 people, suddenly gone very quiet. And there was Ryan Walker, standing on an actual chair in the middle of the dance floor, one hand holding a bourbon glass, the other extended in Natalie's direction, like he was presenting evidence in court. He was talking, clearly, coherently, and with the kind of ruinous earnestness that is only available to men who are too drunk to be afraid. Ryan turned the volume up. I know this is not appropriate, and honestly, I know HR is somewhere in this room, and I know my boss is somewhere in this room, and I don't care right now. I genuinely don't care because I have spent 2 years being professionally appropriate, and I am so tired of it." Laughter from the crowd. Nervous, uncertain laughter. The kind people produce when they're not sure whether they're watching something hilarious or catastrophic. Natalie Brooks. Video. Ryan continued with the devastating clarity of the truly inebriated, "has saved 3 of my supplier contracts. She has fixed a mistake in my quarterly report that would have cost this company $40,000, and she never told anyone whose mistake it was. She spent 20 minutes one afternoon teaching my 9-year-old daughter how to build a bridge out of cardboard, and Sophie still has that bridge on her bookshelf, and I have never told her why I kept it." The crowd had gone quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet, the other kind. "I have been..." Video. Ryan paused, and even through the phone screen, even watching himself do this, Ryan could see the emotion moving across his own face. "I have been in love with this woman for almost 2 years, and every single day I come to work and I sit 15 feet away from her, and I talk to her about logistics and procurement and supplier lead times, and I go home and I tell myself that's enough. That being near her is enough. That a man who has a daughter to raise and a job to keep and responsibilities that man doesn't get to want anything else. A woman near the back of the ballroom. Ryan couldn't see who said something that sounded like, "Oh, honey, I'm so tired of being enough," video Ryan said. "I'm tired of being responsible and contained and professional. She's the first person I want to call when something good happens. She's the first person I want to call when something terrible happens. She fixed my dishwasher one time because she was at my apartment and she could see it was broken and I didn't ask her to, and she just did it." Who does that? Who just fixes someone's dishwasher? More laughter. Warmer now. Natalie. Video Ryan looked directly at her, and even on a shaky phone screen, Ryan could see her standing at the edge of the crowd, very still in her emerald dress, her expression unreadable. "I would very much like you to move into my house. With me and Sophie. And I understand that's a lot. But I have been trying to figure out how to say it sober for 8 months, and apparently, this is the only way it's coming out." Silence. Then video Ryan added, "The guest room has a really good closet." The crowd lost it. Ryan stopped the video. He stood in Natalie's kitchen, holding his phone, staring at the paused frame, and experienced a sensation he could only describe as his entire chest cavity being rearranged. He remembered none of it, not one word. He had said all of that had meant all of that clearly, because drunk men lied poorly, and every syllable of it was true, and he had no memory of any of it whatsoever. He turned to Natalie. She was watching him from the table, both hands still around her mug expression, still that particular calibrated stillness. Ryan started. He stopped. "I don't remember any of that," he said. "I know," she said. "But those things I said about the bridge and the dishwasher, and I didn't invent those things." "I know." "Natalie." "Ryan, I meant it." He heard his voice, and it was different from the voice on the video, quieter, less bourbon bright, more stripped down. "I know that doesn't fix how I said it, but I meant all of it." Natalie looked at him for a long moment. Then she set her mug down. And something in her expression shifted, not softened exactly. Settled. Like she had been waiting for him to say that, and had already decided what came next. "I know you meant it," she said quietly. "That's not the problem. Then what's the problem?" "The problem," Natalie said, "is that I told you no." Ryan felt the floor tilt slightly. "When I asked you to? When you asked me to move in with you? In front of 90 coworkers, your boss, and 3 board members? Yes." She held his gaze without flinching. "I said no." The word landed like something solid. Ryan sat back down. "Okay," he said carefully. "Can I ask why?" "Yeah." Natalie picked up her mug again. She looked into it for a moment. When she looked back up, her voice was very quiet and very level. "Not because I don't love you." Ryan went completely still. "I've loved you for almost as long as you've loved me," she said. "And if you're surprised by that, then you haven't been paying attention, which is a different conversation." She paused. "But I said no because you asked me while you were too drunk to remember asking. And I will not become the woman you choose only when the alcohol outruns your fear." Ryan opened his mouth. Natalie held up one hand, not aggressively, but with complete finality. "I'm not finished." He closed his mouth. "I have watched you," she said, "for 2 years. I know how you take your coffee. I know when your quarterly reports are due because you get quiet in a specific way the week before. I know that Sophie's baseball games stress you out more than work does because you make this face." She demonstrated a subtle jaw tightening when you're talking about them. "I know all of that. And you know all of those things about me." She paused. "But in 2 years, whenever someone at work jokes that we should date you, say I'm just a friend, every single time." Ryan said nothing. "I don't need you to announce us to the company," Natalie continued. "That's not what this is about. It's about the pattern. It's about being privately important and publicly invisible. It's about you wanting all of this." She gestured between them, "as long as no one sees it clearly enough to hold you accountable for it." "That's not," Ryan started. "It is." Her voice stayed quiet. No accusation in it. Just the honest, devastating patience of someone who has thought about this for a long time. You know it is. And I think part of you did what you did last night because you were tired of pretending it wasn't. But Ryan, I needed you to do it when you could remember doing it." Ryan stared at the table. He thought about the video, about his own voice, stripped of everything, careful, saying things he had buried and refused and managed and professionally contained for 23 months. He thought about Sophie's cardboard bridge still on her bookshelf. I thought about the morning 18 months ago, when he had come into the office after receiving news that would have leveled him, the anniversary of his wife's death. A voicemail from the cemetery. A morning he had almost called in sick, but didn't, and Natalie had not asked a single question. She had simply placed a cup of coffee on his desk at exactly the moment he needed it, and then gone back to her own work, and he had held that cup for several minutes before he could breathe normally. He had never told her what that morning was. He had never told her what that coffee meant. He looked up. "I know what I need to say," he said. "I know you do," Natalie said. But Ryan saying it sober is going to mean a completely different kind of courage than whatever was in that bourbon glass. He didn't argue with that, because she was right. And somewhere underneath the headache and the shame and the flooding awareness of everything he had just watched himself confess on a phone screen, Ryan Walker began to understand that last night wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of the harder thing. The thing he'd been running from for 2 years. The thing that required him to be completely sober, completely present, and completely without excuse. He left her apartment an hour later. She walked him to the door. She did not hug him. She did not touch his arm. She stood in the doorway of her apartment with her unfinished braid and her sweatpants and her careful eyes, and she said, "Get some water. Call Sophie." "Natalie." "Ryan." "I want to do this right," he said. I want to actually ask you. When I remember asking." She looked at him for a moment. "Then figure out what changed," she said. "Not for me, for yourself. Because if you're only doing this to fix last night, it won't hold." The door closed. Ryan stood in the hallway of her apartment building in Charlotte, North Carolina, in yesterday's shirt, with 47 notifications on his phone and a confession he didn't remember making echoing in his head. And one sentence from Natalie Brooks that he knew was going to follow him for a very long time. "I will not become the woman you choose, only when the alcohol outruns your fear." He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button. He thought about his wife. He thought about Sophie. He thought about the 5 years he had spent building walls he called responsibility, and the 2 years he had spent letting Natalie live just on the other side of them while telling himself it was enough. The elevator opened. He stepped in, and for the first time in a very long time, Ryan Walker did not know what to do next. That, as it turned out, was the beginning. Monday morning came fast. Ryan had spent Sunday in the particular misery of a man who has publicly humiliated himself and cannot decide whether he is more devastated by the humiliation or by the growing realization that everything he said was completely true. He had called his sister Carol, who had watched the video 3 times and oscillated between laughing until she cried and lecturing him about responsible drinking. He had picked Sophie up from Carol's house. He had made dinner. He had sat at the kitchen table while Sophie did homework and looked across the room at the chair Natalie sometimes sat in when she came over for dinner, and he had felt the specific weight of an absence he had never allowed himself to name. Monday morning he wore his best suit. Not because it would help anything, because it was the only armor he owned. He got to the Brighton Medical Systems office at 7:45, a full 45 minutes before most of the team arrived. He made coffee. He reviewed the weekend's supplier updates. He told himself he was prepared. He was not prepared. The first coworker to arrive was Marcus from Accounts Receivable, who stopped dead in the doorway of the open office, stared at Ryan, pointed slowly, and then said, "Man?" "Marcus. Just man." "I know." "The chair, Ryan." "I know." "You got up on a chair." "Marcus. I have it saved to 3 different places," Marcus said, shaking his head with something that was 90% admiration and 10% concern. "My wife watched it twice. She said, and I'm quoting directly, 'That man better not mess this up.'" "Your wife doesn't know me." "She feels like she does," Marcus said. "That video is personal." Ryan put his headphones on. This did not stop 4 additional coworkers from stopping at his desk before 9 o'clock to deliver variations of the same conversation. By 9:15, he had received the phrase, "You got up on a chair," 7 distinct times, and was beginning to suspect it would follow him for the remainder of his career at Brighton Medical Systems, possibly longer. Natalie arrived at 9:23. Ryan knew this, not because he was watching the door. He was not watching the door. He had actively instructed himself not to watch the door, but because the quality of sound in the office changed. A small ripple of awareness moved through the open floor plan. The particular heightened attention of 60 people who had all watched the same video and were now witnessing the second act in real time. Natalie walked in looking exactly like Natalie. She wore a charcoal blazer over a deep burgundy blouse. Her hair down, her expression completely professional and entirely impenetrable. She nodded to 2 people near the entrance. She stopped briefly at the coffee station. She did not look toward Ryan's desk. Ryan looked at his screen. He looked at it so hard, he read the same procurement update 4 times without absorbing a single word. At 9:47, an email arrived from Sandra Chen, their department head. "Ryan and Natalie, can you both come see me at 10? Nothing alarming, just a quick conversation." Ryan read the email. He looked across the office. Natalie was already looking at him. She held up her phone slightly. She'd received the same email. He nodded. She nodded. They both looked away. Sandra Chen had been their department head for 3 years. She was small, precise, and had the particular energy of someone who managed complex humans the way she managed. Complex supply chains with complete information, contingency planning, and zero tolerance for drama that could have been avoided. She closed her office door when they both sat down. She looked at them. She did not look alarmed. She did not look amused. She looked like a woman who had made a decision and was now implementing it. "I want to start," Sandra said, "by saying that what happened Friday night is not my business, and HR has confirmed that a one-time event at a social function does not automatically trigger a formal review, particularly when both parties are at the same level and neither party has filed a complaint." She paused. "Nobody is in trouble." Ryan exhaled. "However," Sandra said. "Of course. However, as of last Thursday before Friday nights." She searched briefly for a word: event. Brighton Medical Systems finalized the Meridian Health Network contract. $42 million. 18-month implementation timeline. It begins in 6 weeks. She looked between them. "You are both essential to that implementation. Ryan is coordinating regional logistics. Natalie is managing procurement strategy across 4 hospital systems." Ryan knew about the contract. He hadn't known the timeline was that tight. "I need to know," Sand said, "that your working relationship is functional, not comfortable, not perfect functional. Because if it isn't, I need to restructure the team now before we're 3 months in and committed." A short silence. Ryan said, "It's functional." Natalie said, "It's functional." They said it at almost exactly the same moment, and Sandra looked between them with the expression of a woman who had been managing humans for long enough to understand that functional covered a very wide range of actual situations. "Good," she said. "Then I'll leave it there. My door is open if anything changes." She was already reaching for a file on her desk. The meeting was over. Ryan stood. Natalie stood. They walked out of Sandra's office and down the hallway side by side in the particular silence of 2 people who have said nothing and communicated everything. At the junction where their desks diverged, Ryan stopped. Natalie stopped a half step after him. "I meant what I said," he told her. "On Saturday morning. Not the video. Saturday morning. That was me. Sober." Natalie looked at him carefully. "I know," she said. "I need you to know I'm not going to make this weird at work," he said. "The project matters. You built the procurement architecture for Meridian, and it's good work, and I'm not going to compromise that because I can't keep my head on straight." Something in Natalie's expression shifted very slightly. "Okay," she said. "But I also need you to know," Ryan said, "that I'm going to figure out what you asked me to figure out." She waited. "What changed?" he said. For myself, not for you. Natalie studied him for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Okay, Ryan." She turned and walked back to her desk. Ryan turned and walked back to his. And the Meridian Health Network implementation began, and the days accumulated, and Ryan Walker started the hardest kind of accounting, the kind where you look at yourself without the mercy of an excuse. He started with the video. He watched it 4 more times over the following week. Not in the spirit of self-punishment. He resisted that because he recognized self-punishment as another version of avoidance, another way to make the emotion about himself instead of about what it revealed. He watched it the way he would review a supplier contract that had gone wrong. Methodically. Looking for the actual problem underneath the surface problem. And what he found watching himself stripped of all his careful professional management was not a man behaving badly. It was a man telling the truth for the first time in 2 years. Every specific thing he had said. The cardboard bridge, the anniversary morning, the dishwasher, the moment when she became the first person he wanted to call. Those were not bourbon inventions. They were precise. They were accurate. They were the inventory of 2 years of privately loving someone, while publicly insisting he did not. And the question that video forced him to ask himself was not "Why did I say it?" The question was, why had he refused to say it while sober? I thought about this for several days before he could be honest about the answer. He thought about his wife Emily. She had died of a brain aneurysm at 31, quick and total, and without warning on a Tuesday morning when Sophie was 4 years old and Ryan was 31, and they were living a life that had not yet prepared them for any of it. There had been nothing to brace for. There had been no process. One day Sophie had a mother. The next day, she didn't. And Ryan, who had been good at so many things, who had been reliable and organized, and the person people called when they needed someone to hold things together, Ryan had been utterly undone, not publicly. Publicly he had held together because Sophie needed him to, because the mortgage needed him to, because his daughter could not lose both of her parents in the same week. But privately, in the specific way that a man keeps his real inventory, Ryan had made himself a promise. He would not do it again. He would not build something and then lose it. He would not allow Sophie to attach herself to someone who might disappear. He would not. And this was the one he'd never fully examined. He would not let himself want something so much that losing it could destroy him. He called it responsibility. He called it protecting Sophie. He called it being realistic about what a single father with a demanding job could reasonably offer. He had never until a quiet Sunday in his own kitchen when he was looking at the empty chair. Natalie sometimes sat and called it by its actual name. Fear. He was afraid. Terrified specifically of the version of himself that had been sitting in Natalie Brooks's orbit for 2 years. The version that remembered her coffee order and fixed things in her apartment and kept a cardboard bridge on his daughter's bookshelf, and what that version of himself would become if he lost her. He'd been managing that fear by pretending it was a choice. Natalie had looked at it clearly and called it what it was. You keep calling fear responsibility. Ryan sat with that for a long time. He sat with it in the mornings before Sophie woke up. He sat with it on his evening runs along the greenway near their neighborhood. He sat with it in his car after work in the parking deck before he trusted himself to drive home. And slowly, not quickly, not easily, he began to understand the cost of what he'd been doing. Not to himself, to her. He had let Natalie Brooks love him quietly, privately, without acknowledgement for 2 years. He had taken everything she offered: the coffee, the help, the presence at Sophie's school events, the late nights on supplier contracts, the belonging that she had woven into his life. So gradually, he'd almost convinced himself it had always been there, and he had given her nothing in return except proximity and deniability. He had used her love the way people use something they haven't paid for. He had let her be essential without ever letting her be visible. That was the thing Natalie had refused. Not his love, not his fear, not even his proposal, drunk and disastrous and real. She had refused to be invisible. And Ryan, sitting in his kitchen at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night with a cup of coffee and the weight of his own honesty, finally understood that the way he had loved Natalie Brooks for 2 years had not been love. It had been the next best thing to love. The version of love that doesn't require you to risk anything. And Natalie Brooks. Brilliant, patient, dignified, funny. Natalie Brooks, who had watched him choose safe over true for 23 months, had waited as long as she was willing to wait. And then she had said no. Not to him. To the version of him that only showed up when he was too drunk to hold his walls together. Ryan put down his coffee. He looked across the kitchen at the empty chair, and he thought, I'm going to have to become someone different. Not someone new. Not someone Natalie had invented or required or asked him to perform. Someone who had always existed underneath the widower and the father and the reliable logistics coordinator and the responsible man who never let anything cost him too much. Someone who could be afraid and choose anyway. Someone who could love out loud. He looked at his phone. He didn't call her. It wasn't time for that yet. He had work to do first. He put his mug in the sink. He turned off the kitchen light. He walked down the hallway past Sophie's door, where the light was off, and his daughter was asleep, past the cardboard bridge on her bookshelf that he could just barely see in the dark. He went to bed. And for the first time in 2 years, he let himself want something without immediately explaining to himself why he shouldn't have it. 3 weeks after the office party, Ryan Walker had become fluent in a language he had never wanted to learn, the language of consequence. It showed up everywhere. In the office, in the way conversations shifted slightly when he walked into a room, not maliciously, not even conspicuously, but with that specific awareness that settles over a workplace when something real has happened and everyone is still deciding what it means. In the parking deck, where Marcus from Accounts Receivable gave him a thumbs up every single morning with the enthusiasm of a man personally invested in someone else's romantic outcomes. In Sandra Chen's departmental meetings, where Ryan and Natalie sat across the conference table from each other and spoke with complete professionalism about procurement timelines and logistics frameworks and supplier lead times, and where nobody watching them would have guessed that anything had changed, and where Ryan understood with growing clarity that this was exactly the problem. Nothing looked different, which meant nothing had changed, which meant he was already repeating the same pattern Natalie had called out on that Saturday morning in her kitchen. He was still choosing invisible. He caught himself doing it on a Wednesday, exactly 18 days after the party. They were reviewing Meridian intake documentation, the kind of detailed cross-departmental work that required both of them at the same table for 3 hours, and Natalie had found an error in a regional delivery manifest that would have delayed equipment installation at 3 hospital sites by 2 weeks. She had found it quietly, fixed it quietly, and flagged it to Ryan with a single annotated email that saved an implementation timeline he had spent 40 hours building. And Ryan's instinct, immediate, automatic, the reflex of 2 years, was to say thank you in a reply email and move on. He caught the reflex mid-motion. He put down his pen. He looked across the table at her. She was already looking back at her own document pen, moving completely contained. "Natalie," he said. She looked up. "That manifest error. If you hadn't caught that." "I know," she said. "No, I mean Sandra's review is next Thursday. If that delay had hit after the review, it would have been flagged as a critical implementation failure in the first quarter." Natalie looked at him steadily. "I know, Ryan. And I would have been the one who built the timeline with the error in it." "I know that too." He paused. "You fixed it without telling anyone whose mistake it was." She said nothing. "You've done that before," he said. "The quarterly report. 18 months ago." Something moved across her expression. Not surprise exactly. More like the particular look of someone who had been waiting to see whether he was going to notice something and was now watching him notice it. "That's not a big deal," she said. "It is," Ryan said. "It's a significant deal. And I've been the kind of person who let you do it without saying so." The conference room was empty, except for the two of them. 3 hours of implementation documents spread between them. Fluorescent light overhead, the muffled sound of the office outside the glass walls. Natalie put her pen down. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because I've been going through the last 2 years," Ryan said. "Inventory. Everything I should have said and didn't, and this is on the list." She looked at him for a moment. "How long is the list?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that was almost humor, but not quite. "Longer than I'm comfortable with," he said honestly. She picked her pen back up, but the edge of her mouth moved. It was the first time in 18 days that anything between them had felt like the real thing. Ryan held on to that for the rest of the afternoon. Held it carefully, the way you hold something you know is fragile. The way you hold evidence that the thing you're trying to rebuild has not yet turned to nothing. That evening, he picked Sophie up from after-school care. Sophie was 9 and had the particular quality of a child raised around adults who were constantly managing things. She was perceptive in a way that periodically startled Ryan, with a habit of asking simple questions that turned out to be the hardest questions. She asked one in the car on the way home. "Dad, is something wrong with you and Natalie?" Ryan glanced in the rearview mirror. Sophie was looking at him with patient, serious eyes. "Why do you ask that?" he said. "She hasn't come over in 3 weeks," Sophie said. "And you get quiet when I bring her up. You do this thing with your jaw." "What thing with my jaw?" "Like you're chewing something you don't want to swallow," Sophie said. "You do it when you're worried about work too." Ryan drove for a moment. "Things are complicated right now," he said. "Complicated like something broke, or complicated like something's changing." Ryan considered this seriously because Sophie deserved serious answers. "Complicated like I made some mistakes," he said, "and I'm trying to do better." "What kind of mistakes?" "The kind where I cared about someone and wasn't very good at letting them know it." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Did you apologize?" she asked. "Several times." "Did she forgive you?" Ryan paused. "That's a different question than whether she forgave me. She's giving me a chance to show her I actually understand what went wrong. Apologies don't always fix things, Bug. Sometimes you have to prove the apology with time." Sophie thought about this. "That sounds hard," she said. "Yeah," Ryan agreed. "It is. Is she worth it?" The simplicity of the question landed somewhere in the center of his chest. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She is." Sophie nodded, apparently satisfied, and looked back out the window. She was done with the conversation in the way children sometimes are. She'd gotten what she needed from it, filed the information, moved on. Ryan envied her that efficiency. He thought about what she'd said for the rest of the evening. Not the question about Natalie. The earlier one. Complicated like something broke, or complicated like something's changing. Ryan had said broken. But sitting with it later, he wondered if that was accurate. Things broke when force was applied. What had happened between him and Natalie wasn't a break. It was more like a revelation. Something had been wrong underneath the surface for a long time, and the party had simply made it visible. You couldn't fix a break the same way you repaired a crack that had always been there. One required replacement. The other required getting to the root. I was starting to understand which one he was dealing with. The real root wasn't the party. It wasn't even the 2 years of careful invisibility. The real root was a conversation Ryan had never had with himself about what had ended with Emily, what he had actually lost, and what he had decided to do with that loss. He had decided to armor up. He had done it so well that he'd almost convinced himself the armor was just his personality. Natalie had seen through it, which was the part that had terrified him, and the part that he was now slowly beginning to find extraordinary. The following Tuesday, something happened that accelerated everything. Ryan was at his desk at 3 in the afternoon when his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, a 704 area code, Charlotte local, which usually meant a vendor or a school call. He answered. "Mr. Walker." A woman's voice, formal, careful. "This is Patricia Huang from the Meridian Health Network Central Offices. I'm reaching out about a procurement concern we flagged on the implementation intake." Ryan straightened. "What kind of concern?" "We've received documentation suggesting there may be a discrepancy in your company's supplier authorization process for the Phase 1 medical equipment orders. Specifically, we're looking at approvals that appear to have been modified after the initial sign-off. We wanted to give Brighton the opportunity to address this before we escalate to our legal team." Ryan's hand tightened on the phone. "What's the authorization number?" he asked. She gave it to him. He typed it into the procurement system while she was still speaking. He found the entry. He looked at the approval timestamp. He looked at the supplier modification log. He said carefully, "Ms. Huang, can you give me 24 hours to review internally and come back to you directly?" She agreed and ended the call. Ryan sat still for exactly 5 seconds. Then he walked directly to Natalie's desk. She was on a call. She saw his face, said, "Can I call you back in 5 minutes?" without waiting for an answer, and put the phone down. "What happened?" she asked. He told her about the Meridian call. He watched her expression move through a sequence attention confusion, and then something that looked like the beginnings of alarm. "Show me the authorization," she said. He pulled it up on her monitor. She leaned forward. She was quiet for 45 seconds, which was a very long silence for Natalie, who processed information quickly and spoke with precision. Then she said, "That modification timestamp is wrong." "I know." "I didn't make that change." "I know." "Ryan, I approved the original supplier entry on the 4th. That modification shows the 7th. I was at a vendor site visit on the 7th. All day. There's a sign-in sheet and an expense report." "I know," he said. "I need you to pull both of those." "Who else has authorization access on that procurement level?" Ryan looked at her. He said slowly, 4 people in this building." They stared at each other. "Pull everything," Ryan said. "Every timestamp, every access log. Don't send it to Sandra yet, and don't send it to HR. Give me tonight to look at the logistics side, because if the supplier modification connects to what I think it connects to, we need the full picture before this goes up the chain." "Why?" she asked, and there was an edge in her voice that he recognized, not fear, but the sharpest version of her attention. "Why not take it to Sandra now?" "Because if this is what I think it is," Ryan said, "whoever modified your authorization has already been trying to build a narrative. And if we go up with half the story, the narrative they've built looks better than the truth. We need to go up with everything." Natalie studied him. "You think this is deliberate," she said. "I think someone made a costly mistake and found a way to move their fingerprints onto your name," he said. "And I think we have about 48 hours before Meridian escalates." Natalie was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "Okay, what do you need from me?" "Everything you have. Every procurement log from the 4th through the 8th. Every communication with the supplier. And the site visit documentation." "You'll have it in 2 hours," she said. He turned to go. "Ryan." He turned back. "Be careful," she said. "If you're right about this, someone in this building is going to push back when they realize what you're doing." He looked at her. "I know," he said. He went back to his desk. He worked through the rest of the afternoon and into the evening. He ordered food at 6, ate half of it, and kept working. He cross-referenced 3 months of supplier delivery confirmations against the modified authorization. He pulled regional logistics records for the Phase 1 equipment window. He mapped timestamps the way he mapped supply chains, methodically looking for the place where something arrived that wasn't supposed to be there. He found it at 8:47. A logistics confirmation that matched the modified supplier authorization placed 2 days before the modification existed, which meant the modification had been entered retroactively, which meant someone had changed the record to match a decision they had already made, which meant the decision itself, the supplier switch, the one that was now threatening a $42 million contract, had never been authorized by Natalie at all. Ryan sat back. He pressed both palms flat on his desk. He thought about Natalie's face when he'd shown her the authorization. The confusion that had moved across it. The way she'd said, "I didn't make that change," with the particular quiet of someone who was absolutely certain. She hadn't been defensive. She hadn't been afraid. She'd been accurate. I thought about the 4 people in the building with procurement authorization access at that level. 3 of them he could account for through system logs. The 4th, Derek Hale, the senior procurement manager, who had been with Brighton for 11 years, and whose territory overlapped with Natalie's on exactly the equipment categories involved, had a gap in his system access log that corresponded precisely with the modification window. Ryan needed IT to verify it. He needed the audit trail from a level of the system he didn't have direct access to, but he was certain. He called Natalie at 9:15. She answered on the second ring, which told him she hadn't slept either. "I found it," he said, a beat. "Tell me," she said. He walked her through it. The logistics confirmation timestamp. The retroactive modification. The access gap. She was quiet throughout, and he could hear her breathing measured and controlled the way she breathed when she was processing something complicated without letting it overwhelm her. When he finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Derek." "I can't confirm it without IT pulling the full audit trail," he said. "But yes." "He's been with the company longer than I have," Natalie said. "If this goes wrong—" "It's not going to go wrong," Ryan said. "You don't know that." "I know the timestamps," he said. "And I know you. Natalie, I know exactly how careful you are with procurement documentation. I have worked beside you for 2 years. Nobody in that building is more thorough than you are. Whatever Derek Hale or anyone else tries to build the documentation will not hold against what you actually did." The line was quiet. Then very quietly she said, "You're sure?" "I'm sure," he said. "I need 1 day to get IT to pull the full audit trail. Can you hold off on contacting Sandra until tomorrow afternoon?" "Yes," she said. "And Natalie, don't talk to Derek. Not tomorrow, not before this goes up the chain. If he knows we're looking, he'll have time to complicate the record." "Understood," she said. She paused. "Ryan." "Yeah." "Thank you." He held the phone. He wanted to say something more. He had a list, and half of it applied to this moment, and none of it was appropriate for 9:15 on a Wednesday, when she was scared about her career and he was supposed to be focused on protecting it. "Get some sleep," he said instead. "I'll have the IT request in before 7. She said goodnight. He sat at his desk for another few minutes after hanging up, not moving, thinking about the way she'd said thank you quietly, without her professional composure, the real voice underneath. The one she used when she wasn't performing steadiness for anyone's benefit. He had heard that voice in 2 years exactly 4 times. Every single time had mattered enormously to him. He filed the IT request. He went home. He slept for 5 hours. The next morning changed the shape of everything. Sandra Chen called them both into her office at 2 in the afternoon, 4 hours after Ryan submitted the IT request, and 2 hours after IT confirmed the audit trail. The audit trail was exactly what Ryan had suspected: Derek Hale's credentials, a retroactive modification, and a supplier decision made without authorization that had been quietly reframed as Natalie's error. Sandra had the report on her desk when they walked in. She also had Derek Hale sitting in the chair to the left. Ryan had not anticipated that. He felt Natalie go still beside him. Derek Hale was 53, had a corner office, and 11 years of institutional credibility, and was looking at his own hands with the particular expression of a man who has made a calculation and is not yet sure it's failed. Sandra looked at Ryan and Natalie. "Sit down," she said. They sat. Sandra looked at Derek. "Derek, I've reviewed the audit trail IT provided this morning. I've also reviewed the site visit documentation Natalie submitted yesterday." She paused. "The modification to the Phase 3 supplier authorization was accessed using your credentials at 11:42 on March 7th. The logistics confirmation that matches that authorization is timestamped March 5th, 40 hours before the modification existed." Derek said nothing. The original authorization, approved by Natalie, covered supplier A. The modification entered under your credentials switched it to supplier B, a vendor you have an existing relationship with from your previous position. Sandra's voice was entirely level. Supplier B submitted a bid that was $412,000 higher than supplier A, and the differential has not been accounted for in the Phase 1 budget. The room was completely silent. Ryan watched Derek. Derek was still looking at his hands. Then slowly Derek said, "The change was a judgment call. Supplier A had a delivery reliability issue I'd flagged internally." "The internal flag you're referring to," Sandra said, "was submitted to the procurement system on March 9th, 2 days after the modification." Derek said nothing. Which means, Sandra continued without any inflection at all. The documentation justifying the supplier's switch was entered after the switch had already been made and attributed to an authorization that belonged to Natalie. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. Then Derek said, "This is being misread." And Natalie, who had been still and quiet beside Ryan through the entire exchange, said very calmly, "The timestamps aren't being misread, Derek. Timestamps don't have interpretations." Derek looked at her for the first time. Something passed over his face, not quite guilt, not quite anger. Something older and more complicated. "You want to be very careful," he said, "about how hard you push on this." The temperature in the room dropped approximately 10 degrees. Ryan said very quietly, "I'd ask you to be careful about how you mean that." Sandra held up one hand. She looked at Ryan and Natalie. "I'm going to ask you both to wait outside for a few minutes," she said. "I'll come get you shortly." They stood. They walked out. The door closed behind them. In the hallway, Natalie stood very straight and looked at the middle distance and breathed carefully. Ryan stood beside her and did not touch her arm because she hadn't asked him to, and because understanding when to hold back was the thing he was learning. After a moment, she said, "Did you know he'd be in there?" "No," Ryan said. "It was better that way," she said. "If I'd known, I would have walked in differently." "You walked in exactly right," he said. She glanced at him briefly, then looked forward again. "The timestamps don't have interpretations," Ryan repeated quietly. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. "I've been saying that to vendors for 3 years," she said. "I know," he said. "I've heard you say it." She didn't respond to that. But something in her posture changed, not much, just slightly. The particular shift of someone who has heard something and is choosing to hold it rather than return it. They waited in the hallway for 11 minutes. Sandra came out. She asked them to come back in. Derek Hale was no longer in the room. Sandra told them that Derek had been placed on administrative leave pending a formal HR investigation, that Meridian Health Network had been contacted by Brighton's legal team and briefed on the findings, that the contract was intact, that Natalie's procurement record had been officially restored and a correction logged. Natalie thanked her. Ryan thanked her. They walked out. They walked down the hallway together, past the conference rooms, past the copy station, past Marcus's desk, where Marcus looked up and read their expressions with the accuracy of a man who had been watching the situation closely for weeks and did not need an explanation. They stopped at the junction between their desks. Ryan looked at Natalie. She looked like she had just survived something. Not badly, the way a person looks after something difficult has resolved in their favor, and the adrenaline is still leaving their system. Contained, slightly pale, and underneath the containment, something that looked exhausted. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I will be," she said. "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." I wanted to say more. He had 17 things on his list that applied to this specific moment, and he held all of them and said none of them because she hadn't asked for any of them. She had asked him not in words, but in everything she was, to help her uncover the truth. Not to rescue her, to work beside her. And that was what he had done. "The site visit documentation," he said. "The expense report. You had all of that ready before I even asked." "I keep careful records," she said. "You keep perfect records," he said. "You always have." "I should have said that a long time ago." Natalie looked at him. And this time, not like the morning in the conference room. Not like the careful professional distance of the past 3 weeks. She looked at him, the way she had looked at him sometimes before the party, in the private moments that neither of them had acknowledged. The way that had always made Ryan feel seen from the inside out. "Ryan," she said. "Yeah." "Do you want to have dinner?" she said. "Not," she paused. "Not as anything except two people who just had a very long day and need to eat food somewhere that isn't a desk." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I do." "Okay," she said. "But I'm picking the restaurant, because your taste in food is aggressively practical, and I've been watching you eat sad sandwiches for 3 weeks." Ryan laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that surprises you by being bigger than you expected. He hadn't laughed in 3 weeks. Natalie smiled. The real one. The one that reached her eyes. "Give me 20 minutes to finish the meridian correction log," she said, and turned back to her desk. Ryan went back to his own desk. He sat down. He looked at his screen for a moment. Then he looked up at the ceiling. He thought about what Sophie had asked him in the car. Is she worth it? And Ryan Walker, 36 years old, senior logistics coordinator and widower, and single father and man who had spent 2 years calling fear by the wrong name, thought about the past 24 hours. About the phone call at 9:15, and the 5 hours of sleep, and the IT request filed before 7. About Natalie sitting beside him in Sandra's office, composed and precise, and completely certain about her own timestamps. About the way she'd said the timestamps don't have interpretations to a man who was trying to intimidate her without her voice shaking once. I thought about the emerald dress. He thought about the cardboard bridge. He thought about the coffee on the worst morning he'd had in 5 years. And then he stopped cataloging because he'd been cataloging for 2 years, and it had taken him to a chair in a hotel ballroom with a bourbon in his hand and 90 witnesses. The answer had always been the same. He was just finally saying it at the right temperature. Dinner was at an Italian place on South End that Natalie had been to before, and Ryan hadn't. They got a corner table. They ordered food that was not sad sandwiches. They talked for 2 hours. Not about the procurement investigation, not about the party, not about anything they needed to resolve. They talked the way they had always been best at, when they let themselves easily, with real laughter, with the particular rhythm of two people who have learned each other well enough to leave space for the other person's thoughts. On the way out on the sidewalk, Natalie stopped and looked at him. "I have one question," she said. "Okay." "If you had found that audit trail and it was going to cost you the regional director position, would you have submitted it anyway?" Ryan looked at her. He didn't answer immediately. He thought about it, the actual question, the actual stakes. Because she was asking him something real, and she deserved a real answer. "Yes," he said. She studied him. "Without asking me first." He caught himself. "No," he said. "I would have asked you first, what you wanted, not what I thought was right." Something settled in her expression. "That's the right answer," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "I'm learning what the right answers are." She looked at him for one long moment. Then she said, "Good night, Ryan." "Good night, Natalie." She walked to her car. He walked to his. He drove home through the Charlotte streets, past the neighborhoods, past the greenway where he ran in the evenings, past the life he had built and defended and refused to let anyone enter for 5 years. He pulled into his driveway. He turned off the engine. He sat for a moment. His phone buzzed. A text from Natalie. "Your taste in restaurants really is aggressively practical. That was acknowledged tonight." He smiled. He typed back. "You said the chicken was good." She replied. "The chicken was excellent. The choice of table was practical. There's a difference." He laughed. He typed, "Next time you pick the table too." 3 seconds passed. Then, "Next time." 2 words. Ryan sat with them. Next time. She had said next time. Not a promise. Not an arrival. Not forgiveness tied up cleanly with resolution. Just the small, real, ordinary possibility of next time. And Ryan Walker, who had been afraid for 5 years and calling it something else, leaned his head back against the headrest of his car and thought that next time was the most important thing anyone had said to him in a very long time. He went inside. He checked on Sophie, who was asleep with one arm hanging off the edge of the bed in the particular architectural chaos of a 9-year-old. He tucked her arm back in. He stood in her doorway for a moment. He looked at the cardboard bridge on her bookshelf. Still there. Still holding. He went to bed. And for the second time in 3 weeks, Ryan Walker did not try to make his life smaller than it actually was. He let it be exactly the size of what he wanted, and went to sleep inside of it. Next time came sooner than Ryan had planned for, and better than he deserved. It started small, the way the most significant things usually do. A Saturday lunch in late April, 3 weeks after the Derek Hale investigation closed, and 2 weeks after their Italian dinner on South End. Natalie had texted at 10 in the morning. "Sophie's baseball game is today, right?" "What time?" And Ryan had stared at his phone for a full minute before answering, because she had remembered, and he hadn't told her. Which meant she had been keeping track on her own, and that detail hit him somewhere below the ribcage in a way he wasn't prepared for. He answered 11. "Eastway Athletic Complex." "You don't have to." She replied, "I know I don't have to." She was there by 10:45 in jeans and a light jacket, carrying a coffee cup and a bottle of water. And when Sophie spotted her from the dugout, the look on his daughter's face did something permanent to Ryan Walker's chest. "Natalie!" Sophie shouted with the total volume control of a 9-year-old, causing several neighboring parents to turn and look. Natalie waved. She sat beside Ryan on the bleachers. She handed him the coffee cup, his order exactly right without being asked, and said, "I got here early enough to find parking, which means I'm a better planner than you." "The parking lot is 50 yards away," Ryan said. "And yet you're always 5 minutes late to everything." "I'm never late to work." "You're exactly on time to work, which for you means 5 minutes late," she said, and drank her water and watched Sophie's team take the field. Ryan looked at her profile for a moment. She turned and caught him. "Watch your kid play baseball," she said. He smiled and watched his kid play baseball. Sophie went 2 for 3 with a double in the 4th inning. When she crossed second base, she looked directly at the bleachers, and Ryan raised his fist, and Natalie put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled so loudly that Ryan physically startled, and 3 parents turned around. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. "Older brother," she said. "He played college ball. I whistled from the stands for 4 years. You develop skills." Ryan filed that away. He didn't know she had an older brother. He knew her coffee order and her procurement methodology, and the exact face she made when a vendor was wasting her time, and he didn't know she had an older brother who played college ball. He realized he had a lot of learning left to do. After the game, Sophie asked if Natalie wanted to come for lunch. Ryan watched his daughter ask with the careful casualness of a child who had thought about asking and was trying not to seem like she'd thought about it. Natalie, her, no pressure in his expression. He made sure of that. "I'd love to," Natalie said. They went to a diner 3 blocks from the ball field. Sophie sat across from both of them and spent 45 minutes talking about her double, about her teammate Priya's incredible catch in the 5th inning, about whether her coach should have let Marcus a 10-year-old Marcus pitch more innings, about a book she was reading, and about whether it was scientifically possible for a person to eat exclusively grilled cheese forever if they really committed to the idea. Natalie engaged with complete seriousness on all of these topics. On the grilled cheese question, she said, "The research on micronutrient diversity would suggest some challenges in the long term, but the short-term data is extremely promising." Sophie pointed at her with her fork. "That's what I think." Ryan looked at the two of them. He ate his lunch. He thought, this is the thing I've been afraid to lose. Not a version of it. The actual thing in a diner on a Saturday with Sophie talking about grilled cheese science, and Natalie answering with complete sincerity. This exact thing. He was afraid of it not because it might disappear. I was afraid of it because wanting it this much made him the kind of person who could be devastated by losing it. And he had spent 5 years becoming someone who couldn't be devastated. I was starting to understand that this particular project had always been a failure. May arrived, and the Meridian implementation entered its operational phase, which meant 12-hour days and cross-departmental coordination that would have been brutal under normal circumstances, and was something else entirely when conducted alongside a woman you were carefully, quietly trying to fall back into a real relationship with. They were good at the work. They had always been good at the work. That had never been the problem. The problem arrived on a Thursday morning in the 2nd week of May at 9:17, when Sandra Chen walked into the open office and stopped at Ryan's desk and said, "Regional Operations Director, they've decided. It's yours if you want it. I need an answer by Monday." Ryan looked up. The office was not quiet. It never was at 9 in the morning, but the people nearest to Ryan's desk heard, and the specific quality of nearby attention sharpened. Sandra handed him a folder and walked away. Ryan looked at the folder for a moment. Then he looked across the office. Natalie was already looking at him. She had heard. She looked at him for 1 second. Then she turned back to her screen. Ryan opened the folder. Regional Operations Director. His title would change. His salary would increase by 62%. He would oversee logistics coordination across 4 southeastern states. He would travel significantly regularly, with periods away from Charlotte, that would require structured childcare arrangements and schedule restructuring on a level he hadn't dealt with since Sophie started school. He closed the folder. He thought about Sophie. I thought about what he always thought about when career decisions arrived. Sophie's schedule. Sophie's after-school care. Sophie's homework. Sophie's baseball games. Sophie's need for a consistent, present, reliable parent. And then before he could stop himself, before he even fully registered that he was doing it, he thought about Natalie. He thought if she were living with us, this would be easier to manage. He caught the thought. He looked at it. He did not like what he saw. He put the folder in his desk drawer. He worked through the morning. He ate lunch at his desk. At 2 in the afternoon, Natalie appeared at the corner of his workspace and said very quietly, "Do you want to talk about it?" "Yeah," he said. They went to the small conference room at the end of the hall, the one that required a booking, but was almost never used because it was adjacent to the server room and slightly too warm. Ryan closed the door. He told her about this position. She already knew the general structure, but he walked her through the specifics, the travel schedule, the coverage requirements, the timeline. When he finished, she said, "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know." "No," he said. "What's stopping you?" He looked at her. He said, "Sophie's schedule is manageable right now. If I add significant travel, I need regular backup coverage. My sister Carol helps when she can, but she has her own kids. I'd need to rebuild the whole support structure." Natalie listened. Ryan paused. Then he said, and he heard it come out of his mouth in real time and could not stop it fast enough. "If you were living with us, the scheduling would be more manageable." The words landed. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. It was one of the loudest silences Ryan Walker had ever sat in. Natalie looked at him. Not with anger. Not yet. With something more careful and more complicated, the look of someone who had been watching for a specific thing and had just seen it. "Say that again," she said, quietly. "Natalie. Say what you just said again, Ryan, out loud." He didn't want to, but she was asking, and she deserved the honesty of it. "I said if you were living with us, the scheduling would be more manageable." Natalie nodded slowly. She looked at the table. She said, "More manageable for whom?" The question dropped through the floor. Ryan opened his mouth. "For Sophie's schedule," Natalie continued. "For your travel coverage, for your childcare logistics." She looked up. "Or for you, Ryan? Which part were you solving for?" "That's not, I didn't mean it the way." "I know you didn't mean it badly," she said. "That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking what problem you were actually solving in your head when you said that." Ryan said nothing, because the honest answer was all of it. He had been solving all of it. In one sentence, without realizing it, he had turned Natalie Brooks' brilliant, specific, irreplaceable Natalie Brooks into a scheduling solution. "Ryan," she said, and her voice had shifted quieter, now more careful the way she spoke when something was important enough to get exactly right. "I love Sophie. I want you to hear that first. She is extraordinary, and I genuinely love spending time with her." "I know," he said. "But I have spent my entire adult life watching people look at a plus-size woman and make an assumption," she said. "The assumption is that she should be grateful, that she should be flexible, that she should make herself useful enough that someone will want to keep her around." Ryan was very still. "I have had a coworker not at this company before tell me that I should be glad to date a man who had children already because, quote, it meant he was already used to someone like me." She paused. "I have had people at this company since you and I started whatever this is say things, whispers, that I got lucky, that you must want someone maternal, that it makes sense you'd choose a woman like me because I'd be good at taking care of things." Ryan felt something cold move through him. People here said that, he said. People say it everywhere, she said. About women who look like me. It's not new. It's not surprising. But Ryan, she stopped. When the man I love says in a single sentence that having me in his house would make his logistics more manageable, every single one of those voices gets louder. The room was completely quiet. Ryan looked at her. At the composure she was maintaining at considerable cost, he could see the cost of it in the slight tension in her shoulders, in the way her hands were flat on the table. "Natalie," he said, "I'm sorry." "I know you are," she said. "I know you didn't mean it the way it sounds. But Ryan, this is the thing I've been afraid of. Not the party, not the video. This. The moment where I realize you want me, and you also need a solution, and somewhere in your head, those two things are getting filed in the same drawer." Ryan absorbed this. He thought about the folder in his desk drawer. The career opportunity. The travel schedule. The childcare logistics. And the way Natalie's name had appeared in his mind as a variable in a logistical equation. He had not even noticed himself doing it. "I love you," he said. "I know," she said. "That's not what that sentence was," he said. "The sentence was wrong. I said it wrong." "Yes," she said. "You did. But Natalie..." He stopped. He needed to find the right words, not the fast ones. "I want you. Not a schedule solution. You, Natalie Brooks, specifically in a way that has nothing to do with what's convenient." She looked at him. "Then tell me about the promotion," she said. "Tell me what you actually want, not what solves the logistics." He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he said, "I want the promotion. I've been working towards something like this for 6 years. It's the right scope for what I actually know how to do. And I'm scared to take it because I don't have the support structure to do it well, and also be the father Sophie needs me to be." "Okay," Natalie said. "That's honest. And I thought of you," he admitted. "But not because I need childcare. Because you're the first person I think of. About everything." I said it badly. I put the two things in the same sentence because my brain did it before I caught it. Natalie was quiet. "That last part," she said carefully. "I believe you. But you have to be able to separate them," she said. "Because I'll never know. Not really know whether you're choosing me because you want me, or because I fit neatly into what you need. And I can't build something real on a question that never gets resolved." Ryan looked at her. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. And he said it the way he had said it once before in a conference hallway when her career was on the line. Not as a performance, as a real question. She heard the difference. "Figure out the childcare," she said. "On your own. Build the support structure without me in it. Make the decision about the promotion based on what you actually want your career to look like. And then separately, completely separately, let you and me be what we actually are." He looked at her. "That's the harder way," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." "It's also the right way," he said. She held his gaze. "Yes, it is." He nodded. He said, "Okay." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she stood up. She picked up her notepad from the table. At the door she stopped. She said without turning around, "For what it's worth. Ryan, I think you should take the promotion. Not because of me. Because you've earned it, and you're ready for it, and watching you run the Meridian implementation for the past 6 weeks has made that clear to anyone with eyes." She left. Ryan sat in the warm conference room for 4 more minutes. Then he took out his phone and called his sister Carol. "I need to talk to you about childcare," he said when she answered. "Seriously. As a structural conversation, not an emergency favor. Do you have 20 minutes? Carol was quiet for a second. Then, "Ryan Walker, are you actually planning ahead?" "Don't make it weird," he said. "I'm not making it weird, I'm celebrating it," she said. "Give me 10 minutes, I'm in a carpool. Call you back." He called her back. They talked for 40 minutes. They mapped out a real workable Natalie independent support structure. A combination of Carol's existing schedule, a part-time after-school care program Sophie had mentioned wanting to try, and a backup coordination system that Ryan had been resistant to formalizing, because formalizing it meant admitting he couldn't manage everything alone. He had been managing everything alone for 5 years. It had cost him more than he'd been willing to calculate. By Friday, he had a draft plan. By Saturday, he had talked to Sophie about the travel schedule changes in a real conversation, not a managed one. Sophie had asked questions, real ones. Ryan had answered them honestly, including the parts where he didn't have complete answers yet. Sophie had been quiet and then said, "Okay, but you have to actually call when you're away, not just text." "Deal," Ryan said. "And I want a real schedule," Sophie said. "Not approximate, a real one." "Also deal," Ryan said. Sophie looked at him. "You seem different," she said. "Different how?" "Like you made a decision," she said. "You get a certain face when you've actually decided something, versus the face when you're still managing it." Ryan looked at his daughter. "How long have you been able to read me like that?" he asked. Sophie shrugged. "Always," she said, and went back to her book. He accepted the promotion on Monday morning. Sandra shook his hand. Marcus heard the news by 10 and told the entire floor by 10:15. By noon, Ryan had received 14 congratulation messages and one from Natalie that said simply, "Well earned. Meridian implementation is going to be better for it." He looked at that message for a moment. Then he typed back, "The procurement architecture holding this thing together is also well earned. I hope that's on the record somewhere." She replied, "It's on my record. That's enough." He put his phone down. He thought about the conference room conversation. About what she'd said, "I want to be part of your family someday. Don't turn me into the missing piece in yours." He had been trying to make her the missing piece for 2 years. The woman herself was not a piece of anything. She was a whole person who had been waiting with considerable patience and considerable dignity for him to figure that out. He was figuring it out, slowly, imperfectly, in real time. But he was figuring it out. 3 weeks into his new role, Ryan was managing a regional supplier coordination call with teams in Atlanta, Raleigh, and Nashville when his office phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again. He put the call on brief hold, picked up the office phone. It was Sandra. "Come see me when you're done," she said. He finished the coordination call. He walked to Sandra's office. She closed the door. "I want to flag something," she said. "Not a problem, an observation." She folded her hands on the desk. Since Derek Hale's departure, the procurement department has been absorbing his responsibilities, while HR completes the replacement search. That's placed additional load on your team's primary analysts, Natalie specifically. Ryan sat very still. "How much additional load?" he said. "Enough that she's been running 14-hour days for the past 2 weeks, Sandra said. "I've spoken to her about it. She's handling it. But I want you to know, and I'm telling you in your capacity as regional director, not as someone personally adjacent to the situation, that if you're building out the Meridian Phase 2 logistics and you need a procurement strategy partner for the expansion scope, we may be looking at a significant capacity issue." Ryan thought for a moment. "What's the timeline on the replacement hire?" 8 to 12 weeks minimum, Sandra said. "And the Phase 2 expansion timeline?" 6 weeks, Sandra said. Ryan nodded slowly. "I'll look at the distribution model," he said. "There may be a way to restructure the Phase 2 procurement scope so it doesn't collapse onto one analyst." Sandra looked at him. "That would require you to go back to the executive team and ask for a scope adjustment," she said, "which 3 weeks into a new role is a significant ask." "I know," Ryan said. "You'd also be advocating directly for a restructuring that benefits your—" Sandra paused, choosing carefully, "a member of your immediate team." "I'd be advocating for a restructuring that benefits the project timeline," Ryan said. "The fact that it also reduces an individual analyst's unsustainable workload is not a conflict. It's a consequence." Sandra studied him. Then she said, "Make the case and I'll present it." I made the case. It took 2 days and 3 rounds of documentation. He presented it not as a favor to Natalie, but as a logistics risk to the implementation, a single point of failure in the procurement architecture that Phase 2 timelines made unacceptable. He sourced it. He modeled it. He attached the workload distribution data. The executive team approved the restructuring on a Wednesday afternoon. Ryan sent the confirmation to Sandra. He did not tell Natalie about the case he had made. He did not position it as something he had done for her. He left work at 6. He picked up Sophie from after-school care. He made dinner. At 8:15, his phone buzzed. Natalie Sandra told me about the Phase 2 restructuring, the scope adjustment. Ryan waited. Another message. She told me you built the case. He looked at his phone. He typed. The timeline had a single point of failure. That's a logistics problem. She replied, you could have left it. He typed back, I know. 3 seconds passed. Natalie. You didn't tell me you were doing it. Ryan. You didn't ask me to fix it. It was a project problem I was positioned to address. A longer pause this time. Then, that's the right answer. Ryan put his phone down. He leaned back in his kitchen chair. He thought about the conference room. About her asking him weeks ago, what do you want me to do? And him understanding finally what she was actually asking. Not for rescue, for partnership. For someone who asked instead of assumed. Who helped instead of managed. Who understood the difference between I did this for you and I did this because I could and it needed doing. He was learning. He was genuinely, actually learning. And then May ended and June arrived. And the thing that had been slowly building between them, careful and real and unhurried, began to feel like something with actual gravity. They had dinner twice more. Both times real dinners at restaurants Natalie chose. They talked for hours. They argued once mildly and productively about procurement software philosophy, which was perhaps the most specific argument two people could have, and also Ryan thought the most them argument they could have. Natalie was right. He told her so. She looked at him with exaggerated suspicion. You're agreeing with me, she said. You made a better argument. You always make me justify it further when I'm right about something. I was testing the argument, he said. It held. The argument held from the beginning, she said. Now I know it held under pressure, he said. She pointed at him with her fork. That is an extremely aggravating quality. I know, he said cheerfully. I've been told. She shook her head, but she was smiling. He loved her smile. He had always loved her smile. He had spent 2 years cataloging it in a private inventory he'd never admitted to keeping, and was now finally allowed to simply observe directly, without pretending he wasn't. He drove her home that night. They sat in the car outside her building for a moment, the way they sometimes did not in a hurry to move. Natalie said, I want to ask you something. Okay, he said. Are you happy? She said. Not managing, not responsible, not coping with the structure of your life. Actually happy. Ryan thought about it. He thought about the promotion. About Sophie's baseball game and the double in the 4th inning. About the cardboard bridge. About the restructuring he had built and submitted and never mentioned to Natalie until she asked. About the phone call with Carol that had taken 40 minutes and produced a childcare plan that actually worked. About the argument about procurement software that Natalie had won because she was right. About this car on this street on this night. Yeah, he said. I am. She looked at him. Good, she said quietly. She got out of the car. He watched her walk to her building door. Just before she went in, she turned and looked back at him through the car window. She wasn't smiling. She was just looking at him with the particular expression he had been trying to read for 2 years, and was only now beginning to understand the one that was not composure or professionalism, or careful management of what she let him see. It was simply her, Natalie Brooks, watching him, letting herself be seen watching him. He raised his hand. She raised hers. She went inside. Ryan sat in the car for a moment. Then he drove home through the Charlotte streets, and he was not afraid, and he did not try to make the wanting smaller than it was, and he thought about what came next. The way a man thinks about something he intends to do, not as a question, but as a direction. He had a direction now. He was walking toward it. And for the first time in 5 years, Ryan Walker was not walking toward it alone. June moved into July the way summer does in Charlotte, fast humid without apology. Ryan's new role as Regional Operations Director had a learning curve that was less a curve and more a vertical wall. 4 southeastern states, 11 hospital network sites, a Phase 2 implementation that was already running 3 weeks ahead of schedule because Natalie's restructured procurement architecture was performing exactly as she had built it to perform. He was traveling to Atlanta on Tuesdays, to Raleigh on alternate Thursdays, and managing everything else from a combination of his Charlotte office and his kitchen table at 6 in the morning before Sophie woke up. It was more than he had managed before. It was also surprisingly less exhausting. Because the childcare structure he had built, not assembled in a panic, not borrowed from whoever was available, but actually planned in advance with Carol and the after-school program, and a backup calendar that Sophie had helped color code held. Not perfectly. Nothing held perfectly. But it held. Sophie called it the system, with the particular reverence a 9-year-old reserves for something she has had a hand in creating. The system is working, she reported one Wednesday evening with the authority of a project manager reviewing a quarterly outcome. The system is working, Ryan agreed. I want credit, she said. You have full credit, he said. Good, she said, and went back to her homework. Ryan looked at his daughter for a moment and thought not for the first time that Sophie Walker was going to be an extraordinary adult, and that he was somehow both responsible for this and completely unprepared for it. He and Natalie had dinner again on a Friday in early July. This time Ryan picked the restaurant. He had asked Carol for a recommendation, a real one, not a practical one. And Carol had given him the name of an Italian place in No Day that she described as the kind of place where you actually taste the food instead of just consuming it, which Ryan took as sufficient endorsement. He told Natalie when he arrived that the restaurant was Carol's recommendation, not his. Natalie looked at the menu, then at him, then back at the menu. Your sister has good taste, she said. She does, he said. She'd also like to formally meet you at some point. She asked me to tell you that. Natalie looked up. She's seen the video, Ryan said. Multiple times. She has opinions. About me specifically. About the whole situation. But about you specifically, she said, and I'm quoting directly, that woman has more patience than anyone I have ever met, and also, she is clearly the only functional adult in this story. Natalie considered this. I like your sister, she said. She'll be insufferable when I tell her that, Ryan said. Then tell her anyway, Natalie said. Accurate things should be said, he told Carol the next morning. Carol was as predicted insufferable about it. She also said, Ryan, are you actually doing this right? Because watching you do things wrong for 2 years was exhausting, and I need you to be doing this right. I'm trying, he said. Trying isn't doing, Carol said. I'm doing, he said. I'm doing it right. A pause. Good, Carol said. Because she's a keeper, Ryan. Don't blow it. He had no intention of blowing it. What he had not anticipated was the thing that arrived on a Tuesday morning in mid-July, quiet and devastating through no one's fault and without warning. He was in his office at 7:45, reviewing Atlanta delivery confirmations, when his phone rang. His sister Carol's name was on the screen. Carol never called before 9. He answered. Ryan. Her voice was careful. The careful that meant something had happened. What is it? He said. Tom fell this morning, she said. Tom was Carol's husband. He was on a ladder in the garage. He's okay. He's going to be okay, but his wrist is broken and his left ankle. He's in emergency now. They're saying he'll need surgery on the ankle. Ryan was already standing. I'm coming. No, stay, Carol said. He's okay. I promise he's okay. But Ryan, I can't do the Wednesday pickup. And the Thursday one. I can't. I'm going to be at the hospital most of today and tomorrow, and even after that, Tom's going to need help at home for a while. Ryan went still. He looked at his desk. His schedule. The Atlanta supplier call on Wednesday morning at 8. The Raleigh site visit Thursday afternoon that he had rescheduled twice, and could not reschedule again without damaging the relationship with the Raleigh Hospital Network coordinator. He had a system. The system had a gap. He spent the next 40 minutes making calls. The after-school program could extend coverage through 5:30, but not beyond. The backup coordinator he had identified, a neighbor named Janet, who had watched Sophie twice before, was in Florida, visiting her daughter. Ryan's next option was a childcare service he had researched but never contracted, and their onboarding process took 72 hours minimum. He had 48. He sat at his desk. He looked at his phone. He thought about Natalie. He held the thought, turned it over carefully, and examined what was underneath it. Was he thinking of Natalie because he wanted to talk to her, because she was the first person he called when something difficult happened, which had been true for 2 years and was not a logistics function, it was a love function? Or was he thinking of Natalie because she was a scheduling variable? He sat with the question for 3 full minutes. Then he called Marcus. "I have a childcare emergency," Ryan said when Marcus answered. "I need 20 minutes to think out loud with someone who isn't going to make it complicated." Marcus said, "I'll come to your office." Marcus came to his office. Ryan talked through the schedule gap. Marcus, who had 3 kids of his own and had navigated a version of every childcare emergency that existed, listened with the focused attention of an expert consultant, and then said, "Call the extended care coordinator at Sophie's school directly. Not the main office. The coordinator. Her name is Ms. Patterson. She has a waiting list, but she also has a discretionary slot for genuine emergencies, and Ryan, a broken ankle surgery, is a genuine emergency." Ryan called Ms. Patterson. Ms. Patterson had a discretionary slot. Wednesday and Thursday were covered. Ryan leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling. "Thank you," he said. Marcus shrugged. "You built a system. Systems have contingencies. You just didn't know where all the contingencies were yet." He stood up. "Also, for what it's worth, you solved this without doing the thing you would have done 4 months ago." Ryan looked at him. "What thing?" "The thing where you would have called Natalie first, and then told yourself it was because she was convenient," Marcus said. Ryan stared at him. "Man, everybody in this office has been watching you figure yourself out for months," Marcus said. "It's been like a nature documentary, very stressful, but educational." He picked up his coffee cup. "For what it's worth, you're figuring it out." He walked out. Ryan sat for another moment. Then he called Natalie. Not about Sophie. Not about the schedule. He called because Tom was in surgery, and Carol was scared, and Ryan had just spent 40 minutes managing a crisis alone successfully, and she was the first person he wanted to tell when something went right. She answered on the second ring. "Is everything okay?" she said immediately. "Yes," he said. "Carol's husband broke his ankle. He's in surgery. She's okay, he's going to be okay. I had a childcare gap and I solved it." He paused. "I called to tell you that." A beat. "Ms. Patterson," Natalie said. Ryan blinked. "How do you know about Ms. Patterson?" "Sophie told me," Natalie said. "She told me Ms. Patterson runs the best extended care program in the district, and that she once gave a kid a granola bar during a thunderstorm delay, and that this constitutes heroism." Ryan laughed. "She's not wrong," he said. "Sophie is rarely wrong about people," Natalie said. A pause. "Ryan, I'm glad you called." "Me too," he said. "I went to see Carol at the hospital that evening, after Sophie was picked up and settled at home with the neighbor's teenager babysitting. Carol was in the waiting area outside the surgical floor, holding a cup of coffee. She hadn't drunk, doing the thing she did when she was scared, which was to become extremely organized about small things. Her jacket was folded precisely. Her phone was at exactly full charge. Her bag was sorted. She looked up when Ryan arrived. He sat beside her. He didn't say anything. He just sat. After a few minutes, Carol said, "You smell like someone who ate dinner." "I grabbed something on the way," he said. "Did you bring anything for me?" He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a granola bar from the vending machine near the elevator. Carol looked at it. "Truly, you are a man of romance," she said. "It's all they had," he said. She took it. They sat in silence for a while. Then Carol said, "How are things with Natalie?" "Good," Ryan said. "Good like actually good, or good like you're managing it?" "Good like actually good," he said. It's real. It's happening slowly, but it's real." Carol ate a piece of the granola bar. Have you told her? Told her what? What you told me, Carol said. That she's the first person you think about. That you're not afraid anymore. Ryan looked at the floor. I've shown her, he said. Ryan. What? Women know the difference. Carol said, between being shown and being told. Both matter. You can't substitute one for the other. She looked at him. Tell her. With words. Sober words this time. He didn't answer, but he heard it. Tom came out of surgery at 9:40. The surgeon said it had gone well. Carol cried briefly and then became immediately practical about discharge logistics, which was so Carol that Ryan almost laughed. He drove home. Sophie was asleep. He checked on her, straightened her blanket, looked at the cardboard bridge on the shelf. He stood in the doorway of her room for a moment. He thought about what Carol had said. Tell her. With words. He went to bed. He didn't sleep immediately. He thought about Emily. He did this sometimes, still not with the specific wrenching grief of the first 2 years, but with the particular quality of memory that doesn't hurt anymore, so much as it simply lands. He thought about who Emily had been, about the life they had built in the time they had, about the morning he had lost her, and the version of himself that had walked out of that hospital and made a promise to an interior wall he'd constructed and called it protection. I thought about what Natalie had said the first Saturday morning in her kitchen. I will not become the woman you choose, only when the alcohol outruns your fear. He thought about the distance between that morning and this one, the ground he had crossed, imperfectly, slowly, with wrong turns and bad sentences, and one genuinely catastrophic conference room moment where he had turned the woman he loved into a scheduling variable. But he had crossed it. He was still crossing it, and Natalie had watched him cross it without demanding he arrive faster. That, Ryan thought, was its own kind of love. He fell asleep at 11:30. August arrived. The meridian phase. 2 implementation launched on schedule, a fact that Sandra acknowledged in a department-wide email that specifically credited both Ryan's logistics framework and Natalie's procurement architecture. Ryan read the email. He looked across the office at Natalie's desk. She was already looking at him. She raised her coffee cup slightly. He raised his. 2 weeks into August, something happened that Ryan had not expected and could not have planned for. It was a Sunday. Sophie had a baseball tournament, a full-day thing, 4 games starting at 8 in the morning and running through the afternoon. Ryan had been planning to be there for all of it. He had adjusted his Monday prep work accordingly. He had packed lunches. Natalie showed up at 7:50 with her own camp chair. Ryan looked at the camp chair. You bought a camp chair, he said. I had a camp chair, she said. From a lake trip 2 summers ago. I found it in my storage unit. You didn't tell me you were coming. You didn't ask me, she said. I would have asked. Ryan, she said, looking at him with complete patience. I wanted to come, so I came. You don't have to invite me to things for me to want to be there. He looked at her. She set up her camp chair beside his. Also, she said, I looked up Sophie's batting average from the last 5 games, and I have thoughts. You what? She's pulling her left shoulder early on outside pitches, Natalie said. Her contact rate drops by about 30% in the outside third of the strike zone. I watched the video from the Thursday game. Ryan stared at her. You watched video, he said. I like baseball, she said simply. And I like Sophie. The combination is enjoyable. He sat down beside her. He thought Carol is right. I need to say it. With words. He sat with the thought through the first game, while Sophie's team won 6-3 and Sophie went 1 for 2 with a walk and a stolen base. He sat with it through the break between games 1 and 2, while Natalie coached Sophie on the outside pitch problem with such specific and practical detail that Sophie's coach wandered over to listen and ended up in a 10-minute conversation with Natalie about pitch selection philosophy. He sat with it through Game 2, which Sophie's team lost narrowly, and which produced considerable discussion on the drive to the concession stand about what constituted a strike versus a questionable call, during which Sophie was emphatic and specific, and Natalie agreed with her on the substance, while gently redirecting the energy away from explicit commentary about the umpire's eyesight. In the break before Game 3, Sophie went with her teammates to the bathroom, and Ryan and Natalie sat alone in their camp chairs in the August heat. Ryan said, "I need to tell you something." Natalie turned to look at him. He said, "You are the first person I think about. Not as a variable, not as a solution, as the first person. When something good happens, when something difficult happens, when Sophie does something that surprises me, when I make a decision I'm uncertain about. You're the first person." Natalie was very still. "I have been showing you that," he said. "But Carol told me showing isn't enough, and she's right. So I'm telling you." He paused. "I love you. I'm not afraid of the size of that anymore. I'm not afraid of what losing it would do to me. I'm not going to manage this into something smaller than it is, because smaller is safer." The baseball tournament continued around them. Kids shouting on adjacent fields. Parents in folding chairs. The particular humid thickness of a Carolina August morning. Natalie looked at him. Her expression did something he had never seen it do before. Not the composure, not the professional steadiness, not the careful management of what she let through. It simply opened. Like she had been holding a door closed for a long time and had finally decided the room on the other side was safe. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. "I hear you. That's it." "Ryan," she said, and there was something warm in her voice that was almost a laugh. "I've been waiting for you to say that with your whole chest for a very long time. I'm going to need a moment to just hear it." He waited. She looked at the baseball field. She breathed. Then she turned back. "I love you too," she said. "I have for a long time. You know that." "I know," he said. "And I'm not afraid of it either," she said. For a while I was afraid of what it would cost me if you didn't figure yourself out. But I'm not afraid anymore." "What changed?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "You did," she said. "Not for me, for yourself. That's the only version that holds." Sophie came running back from the bathroom and threw herself into her camp chair and announced that Priya thought Game 3's pitcher was going to be significantly more aggressive and that they needed to be prepared for this as a team and also as spectators. Ryan looked at his daughter. He looked at Natalie. Natalie was already nodding seriously at Sophie's tactical assessment. He sat back in his camp chair, and the tightness that had lived in his chest for 5 years, the constant low vigilance of a man who has lost something enormous and spends every subsequent day making sure he doesn't lose anything else, eased. Not disappeared. Eased. The way a muscle releases when you stop clenching it. He let himself sit in the middle of what he had. Sophie's team won Game 3. They lost Game 4 in extra innings, 7-6, on a call that Sophie described as criminal, and Natalie described as questionable, and Ryan described as the kind of thing that builds character, which both Sophie and Natalie looked at him for with identical expressions of gentle disbelief. They drove home together. Natalie's car following Ryan's because she'd driven separately and was heading back to her apartment and stopped for ice cream at a place on the way that Sophie had chosen with the decisive authority of someone who had earned the right to choose. At the ice cream shop, Sophie sat across from both of them and ate her cone with the focused attention of someone doing important work, and then said without looking up, "Are you guys dating now?" Ryan looked at Natalie. Natalie looked at Ryan. "Yes," Ryan said. Sophie considered this while eating ice cream. "Good," she said. "I've been waiting for you both to figure that out." Natalie looked at Ryan with an expression that said very clearly, "Your daughter is the most perceptive person in this family." Ryan agreed completely. He drove home with Sophie asleep in the back seat by 7:30, which was the fastest a 9-year-old had ever surrendered to exhaustion in his experience, and which he attributed to 4 baseball games, 1 tactical coaching conversation, and what Sophie described as the best chocolate ice cream she had eaten in recent memory. He carried her inside. He tucked her in. He looked at the cardboard bridge. He texted Natalie. "She was asleep before we hit the highway," Natalie replied. 4 baseball games and a tactical debrief. I'm surprised she lasted through dessert." Ryan. She said it was the best chocolate ice cream in recent memory. Natalie high praise from an exacting critic. Ryan sat at his kitchen table. He typed, "Thank you for today." She replied, "I was there because I wanted to be." He typed, "I know. That's what I'm thanking you for." A pause. Then, "Good night, Ryan." He typed, "Good night, Natalie." He sat in his kitchen for a while after that. Not reviewing anything. Not planning anything. Not managing the quiet into something useful. Just sitting in it. In mid-September, Natalie started coming to dinner on Thursday nights. Not every Thursday she kept her own schedule, her own plans, her apartment, her autonomy, but most Thursdays. She and Sophie had developed a ritual involving a specific playlist they had curated together, which Ryan was not permitted to modify, and a cooking arrangement where Sophie narrated and Natalie executed, and Ryan was assigned dishes, which he suspected was partly practical and partly the world's most comfortable way of keeping him out of the kitchen. I didn't mind. He stood at the sink and listened to them talk. Sophie told Natalie about school with the specific detail she reserved for people she trusted, not the summary version she gave adults who asked politely. Natalie listened and responded and remembered things from previous conversations and asked follow-up questions that demonstrated she had actually been paying attention. Ryan washed dishes and thought about what it meant that this felt natural, not performed, not managed, not a version of what he thought it should look like, just natural. Thursday evenings. Sophie's playlist. Natalie in his kitchen. The cardboard bridge on Sophie's shelf. In late September, something shifted without any particular event triggering it. Ryan was in Raleigh on a Thursday, a schedule conflict that had moved his travel day, and he was finishing a site meeting at 4 when his phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Natalie brought food, and we're making dinner. She says you have to call during, or it doesn't count. He smiled. He called. Natalie answered, which meant Sophie had handed her the phone. "You're on speaker," Natalie said. "Sophie is currently explaining why the pasta water needs more salt than I suggested, and I need a neutral third party." "More salt," Ryan said immediately. Sophie made a triumphant sound. "You didn't even think about it," Natalie said. "I didn't need to," Ryan said. "Sophie is right about salt. This family," Natalie said, and there was something in her voice when she said it, a softness unguarded that she hadn't fully edited, that stopped Ryan mid-thought. This family. She had said it without planning to. He heard it land and he let it land, and he did not make it significant out loud, because she hadn't meant to say it out loud, and some things were allowed to be true before they were named. He talked to them through dinner. Sophie updated him on the tournament standings for Fall League. Natalie told him the pasta was excellent, and that Sophie had been correct about the salt, and that she was updating her position accordingly. He drove back to Charlotte the next morning. He walked into his house at 10. Sophie was at school. The house was quiet. He walked through to the kitchen. There was a note on the counter in Natalie's handwriting. Leftovers in the fridge second shelf. Your coffee situation is critically low. Fix the cabinet hinge that was loose. Don't thank me, it was aggravating me. Ryan stood at this counter and read the note. He read it twice. He thought about a conversation months ago when Natalie had told him that she had fixed his dishwasher because she could see it was broken and she hadn't been asked and she had just done it. And drunk. Ryan on a hotel chair had asked a ballroom full of people. Who does that? Who just fixes someone's dishwasher? He knew who. He had always known. He put the note in the kitchen drawer. He did not throw it away. That evening when Sophie came home, she asked if Natalie was coming Thursday. If she wants to, Ryan said. Text her, Sophie said. I'll ask her, he said. Text her now, Sophie said. So she can plan. Ryan looked at his daughter. You're managing me, he said. Someone has to, she said. She was already walking away. He texted Natalie. She replied within 3 minutes. Yes, I'm bringing dessert this time. No input on what kind. Sophie, reading over his shoulder, pumped her fist. Ryan shook his head. He was smiling. He realized genuinely, completely, without managing it into something more controlled, happy. October came. The Meridian implementation cleared its 6-month review with a performance rating that put Brighton Medical Systems ahead of every contracted metric. Sandra acknowledged it in a full leadership meeting. Ryan and Natalie received individual commendations from the executive board. Ryan looked at the commendation letter. He thought about where he had been a year ago. The party, the video, the ceiling he didn't recognize, the shoes placed neatly beside a dresser that wasn't his. He thought about Natalie in her kitchen doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee, wearing sweatpants, saying, "Before you start panicking, nothing happened." And then, "But we do have another problem." And then the sentence that had redirected the entire trajectory of his life: "I will not become the woman you choose, only when the alcohol outruns your fear." He put the commendation letter in his desk. He looked across the office. Natalie was at her desk on a call pen, moving completely absorbed. She hadn't seen him look. He looked for a moment longer. He thought, "I'm going to ask her. Not today. Not in the office. Not as a reaction to a commendation letter, or a career milestone, or any external event that gave him cover. He was going to ask her when he was ready. When the asking came from the right place, not fear resolved, not logistics managed, not the relief of arriving at a destination. From wanting. Simply, completely, from wanting. He was not there yet. But he was close. He could feel it the way you feel something approaching before you can see it clearly. He turned back to his screen. He worked through the afternoon. And the season moved toward its end, carrying with it the particular gravity of something that had been building for a long time and was finally quietly arriving at the place it had always been heading. The annual Brighton Medical System celebration fell on the second Friday of November, exactly 1 year and 4 days after Ryan Walker had stood on a chair in the Ballantine Hotel ballroom and told 100 coworkers he was in love with Natalie Brooks. He thought about that number. 1 year and 4 days. He thought about everything that had fit inside that distance. The Saturday morning ceiling, the video, the conference room with Derek Hale, the Italian restaurant on South End, the camp chairs at the baseball tournament, the note on his kitchen counter about the cabinet hinge. Sophie's voice saying, "Good, I've been waiting for you both to figure that out." 1 year and 4 days. He had lived more honestly in that stretch of time than in the 5 years preceding it. He arrived at the Ballantine wearing a different suit than last year. This was not superstition. It was simply that the suit he had worn last year now had a bourbon stain on the left cuff that no dry cleaner in Charlotte had been able to fully address, which he had decided was the universe being literal about the cost of that evening. He got a sparkling water at the bar. Marcus appeared beside him within 45 seconds. "Sparkling water?" Marcus said, looking at the glass. "Sparkling water," Ryan confirmed. "Smart man." Marcus looked around the ballroom. "You know the whole company is watching to see what happens tonight." "I know," Ryan said. "There's a pool," Marcus said. Ryan looked at him. "A pool?" "About whether you're going to do something," Marcus said. "Another speech, a public thing, something dramatic. There's a pool." "Who's running it?" "I'm not at liberty to say." "Marcus." "Accounts receivable," Marcus said. "That's all I'm giving you." Ryan looked at him with the patience of a man who had worked beside Marcus for 4 years and had long since accepted that accounts receivable contained its own ecosystem of activity that operated parallel to the formal company structure. "Tell accounts receivable," Ryan said, "that there will be no speech, no chair, no microphone, no public anything." Marcus studied him. "Is that because you're not going to do anything, or because you're going to do it differently this time?" Ryan looked at him. "Differently," he said simply. Marcus nodded slowly with the gravity of a man receiving important intelligence. "I'll let them know the pool has been invalidated by new information," he said, and walked away. Ryan turned back to the room. Natalie arrived at 7:15. She was wearing an emerald green dress. Ryan had not known she was going to wear that dress. He had not asked because asking would have meant he was managing the evening and he was done managing things he didn't need to manage. But she walked in wearing that specific green, and Ryan felt the symmetry of it somewhere in his spine, not painful, not ironic, just complete, like a parenthesis closing. She found him near the windows. She looked at his glass. "Sparkling water," she said. Sparkling water, he said. She raised her own glass, also sparkling water, and something passed between them that was warm and private and required no translation. The whole company is watching us, she said quietly. I know, he said. Marcus told me there was a pool. Sandra told me there was a pool, she said. Sandra knows about the pool. Sandra runs a parallel pool with the management team, Natalie said. I found out 20 minutes ago and I'm still processing it. Ryan laughed, a real one, unguarded. What are the odds? I didn't ask, she said. It felt like information that would make this evening more stressful, and I'm trying to have a good time. Smart, he said. She looked around this ballroom, then back at him. Are you okay? She asked. Not performatively. The real question, the one she asked when she wanted the real answer. Yeah, he said. I am. Last year this room was the worst and best night of my adult life, Ryan said. Tonight it's just a party. She looked at him steadily. Just a party? He met her eyes. A party I'm glad to be at. With you. Sober enough to remember being glad. Something in Natalie's expression moved the particular softening. She still didn't always let him see. Still not completely open. Still the woman who had learned to be careful with what she gave away. But she let it show. For a moment, fully. Okay, she said. They stayed 2 hours. They talked with coworkers. They sat at a table with Sandra and 2 members of the implementation team, and had a genuine, enjoyable conversation about Phase 3 planning that Ryan would not have predicted himself capable of enjoying a year ago, but which he found actually satisfying. He liked his job. He liked the people he worked with. He liked that Natalie sat beside him and argued a procurement timeline point with the Phase 3 coordinator with such precise logic that the coordinator visibly reconsidered his position in real time. He liked watching her be excellent at things. He had always liked that. He was finally allowed to like it openly. At 9:15, Natalie touched his arm. I'm going to get some air. He followed. They ended up near the same corridor where 1 year ago everything had unraveled. Ryan recognized it without making a production of recognizing it. Natalie looked at him to see if he was going to say something about it. He didn't. She was the one who spoke. Are you planning a speech? She said, one corner of her mouth. Absolutely not, he said. No microphone. No microphone. No bourbon courage. Not even beer courage. She smiled. The real one. The one that reached all the way. He did not propose. He had decided that weeks ago, sitting in his kitchen at 11 at night, with a cup of coffee and a direction. He had decided he was not going to do it in the ballroom. He was not going to do it in the place that belonged to last year, to the version of himself that needed alcohol to tell the truth. That location was already claimed by a different story. He wanted to write a new one. Natalie, he said. Next Sunday. Come to breakfast. She looked at him. Something in the way he said it was different from the ordinary Thursday dinners, and she heard the difference. Breakfast, she said. Me you Sophie pancakes, he said. Normal Sunday morning, nothing dramatic. She studied him for a moment. Okay, she said. He drove home that night with a particular quietness in his chest. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of something settled. He had carried the ring for 3 weeks. He had bought it at a jewelry store on Providence Road with Carol, who had cried in the store and then denied crying and then cried again in the parking lot. It was a simple ring, not elaborate, not performative. Natalie didn't wear elaborate things. She wore things that were right. He hoped it was right. How was going to find out Sunday? Saturday was its own kind of long. Ryan cleaned the house not because it was dirty. The system kept it reasonably ordered, but because he needed to do something with his hands. Sophie watched him wipe the kitchen counter for the 3rd time and said, Dad. What? You're nervous. I'm cleaning. You're cleaning because you're nervous, she said. Those are different things. He put down the cloth. He looked at his daughter. He said, Can I tell you something? Sophie swiveled fully to face him on her kitchen stool. She put her book down. This was Sophie's version of giving someone the floor complete unhurried attention. I'm going to ask Natalie to marry me tomorrow, he said. The kitchen was quiet. Sophie's expression moved through several things in rapid succession. Surprise processing something that looked like the interior equivalent of doing quick calculations, and then arrived at something Ryan had not expected. Her eyes filled. Sophie. I'm not sad, she said immediately firmly. I'm not. She stopped. She pressed the back of her hand against her eye. I'm glad. She stopped again. Ryan crossed to her. He put his hand on her shoulder. Tell me, he said. Sophie looked at him with wet eyes and said, She's the right one, Dad. She's been the right one for a long time. I didn't know if you were going to figure it out. Ryan looked at his daughter. He thought about all the ways Sophie had been watching the jaw thing, the managing face versus the decided face, the gentle and persistent cataloging of her father's emotional weather that a child develops when they've been paying close attention for years. I figured it out, he said. Late, Sophie said, but she was smiling now through the wet eyes. Very late. I know, he said. But you figured it out, she said. The smile steadied. That's what matters. He hugged her. She let him, which at 9 was not always a given. She pulled back and wiped her face with her sleeve. What kind of ring? She asked. Simple, he said. Clean lines, nothing showy. Sophie thought about this. She'll like that, she said with authority. She doesn't wear big jewelry. She has this one gold bracelet she wears every day, and it's thin, and it's perfect, and she never changes it. Ryan blinked. I didn't know about the bracelet. I noticed, Sophie said simply. Someone had to. He went to bed. Saturday night and did not sleep well. Not from dread, not from fear, but from the particular electric alertness of a man who has made a real decision, and is now standing in the hours before he acts on it. He lay in the dark and thought about what he was going to say. Not a speech, not a performance. The truth simply in the right order. He had done that once before, loudly, publicly, memorably, and without any recollection of doing it. I was going to do it again. Quietly. Privately. With his whole memory intact. He was going to do it right. Sunday morning, Ryan made pancakes. Sophie was already at the table doing something on her tablet when Natalie's knock came at the door at 9:58, 2 minutes early, which was Natalie operating on her own schedule without apologizing for it, which was exactly and specifically her. Sophie opened the door. Natalie came in wearing jeans and an oversized green sweater, her hair down, no makeup, the thin gold bracelet on her left wrist that Ryan now looked at and understood he had never noticed, and his daughter had catalogued without being asked. Pancakes, Natalie said, looking toward the kitchen. He made the good ones, Sophie said, with the edges. The crispy edges. The crispy edges, Sophie confirmed. Natalie walked to the kitchen. Ryan was at the stove. She stood in the doorway for a moment in the particular way of someone who has arrived somewhere that feels like it fits them, and Ryan turned and saw her standing there and thought this. This is the thing. The edges are almost done, he said. Good, she said. I've been thinking about this since you said breakfast. You think about food in advance, he said. I think about good food in advance, she said. It's called planning. You should try it. I plan constantly, he said. You plan logistics, she said. That's a subset. Sophie made a sound from the table that was clearly agreement. Ryan flipped the last pancake. They ate breakfast. The conversation moved the way Sunday morning conversations do when everyone at the table is comfortable, unhurried, looping. Sometimes two things happening at once. Sophie described a book she was reading. Natalie asked questions. Ryan poured more coffee. Sophie ate 3 pancakes and negotiated a 4th. Ryan watched them. He watched the ease of it. The natural rhythm. The way Natalie leaned forward when Sophie said something interesting. The way Sophie adjusted her storytelling when Natalie was listening because Natalie's attention was worth performing for. The way his kitchen sounded on a Sunday morning with both of them in it. He had been so afraid of wanting this. He was done being afraid. He looked at Sophie. Sophie looked back at him. She gave him the smallest nod. like a stage manager cueing an actor. Ryan set down his coffee cup. "Sophie," he said, "can you give us a few minutes?" Sophie was already standing. She picked up her tablet. She managed to exit the kitchen with the practiced casualness of someone who had absolutely known this was coming and had prepared their exit. The kitchen door swung closed behind her. Natalie was looking at Ryan. She had gone still. Not afraid still. Aware still. The particular quality of attention she had when she knew something significant was happening and was giving it her complete, unmanaged presence. Ryan reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt. He set the ring box on the table between them. Natalie looked at it. She did not reach for it. She looked at it the way she looked at important documents, carefully, completely giving it the full weight of her attention. Then she looked up at him. Her eyes were bright. She was not performing composure. She was actually composed, and underneath the composure was something that looked very much like the expression Ryan had seen once in a hotel corridor when she had thought no one was watching her watch him. He had been watching. He had always been watching. He was done pretending he wasn't. He said, "I don't need you to answer right now." She waited. "I don't need you to become anyone other than who you are," he said. "I'm not asking you to fill a space in my life. I'm not asking you to be Sophie's mother. I'm not asking you to solve my logistics or fix what's broken in my house or cover what I can't carry. I'm asking you, Natalie Brooks, specifically the person who catches my procurement errors and coaches my daughter's batting stance and keeps records more carefully than anyone I have ever met." He paused and looked at her directly, fully, without the protection of distance or professional management. "Whether you want to build the next part of this life with me, not a part I've designed for you to fit into, a new part, together." The kitchen was completely quiet. Sophie was absolutely not in the hallway listening. Ryan was certain of this, and also completely certain of the opposite. Natalie looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you remember asking?" The question landed with the weight of everything it carried. 1 year and 4 days. A hotel ballroom, a chair, a video. He had watched 17 times a Saturday morning ceiling he didn't recognize. "Every word," he said. "Do you know where you are?" she said. "My kitchen," he said. "Do you know who I am?" He looked at her. Not past her. Not at the idea of her. At her, the brown eyes and the chestnut hair and the thin gold bracelet and the expression she was wearing right now. That was the most unguarded thing he had ever seen on a human face. "The woman I love," he said. "Not Sophie's replacement mother, not my coworker, not the person who makes my life easier or my schedule manageable or my house quieter when things are hard. You, Natalie. Specifically and completely you." Her eyes filled. She did not look away. She reached out and opened the ring box herself. She looked at it for a moment. The simple setting, the clean lines. She looked up at him. "Sophie told you I don't wear big jewelry," she said. "Sophie noticed the bracelet," he said. "I didn't, and she told me." Natalie laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, the kind that breaks through composure without asking permission. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a second. Then she lowered her hand. "Yes," she said, quietly, completely. Without performance. Ryan exhaled. She reached across the table and took his hand. He held it. He did not let go. From the hallway, Sophie's voice arrived, attempting and completely failing to sound casual. "Is it done?" Ryan and Natalie both looked toward the hallway. "Sophie Walker," Natalie said. A pause. "Yes," Sophie said from the hallway. Clearly having been standing exactly where Ryan had predicted she would be standing. "Get in here," Natalie said. Sophie appeared in the doorway at a speed that confirmed she had been approximately 3 feet away the entire time. She looked at the ring box on the table. She looked at Natalie's face. She looked at her father's face. She said yes, Ryan said. Sophie crossed the kitchen and hugged Natalie with the full, unguarded commitment that a 9-year-old deploys when they are not managing anyone's expectations, including their own. Natalie caught her and held her and closed her eyes for a moment. Ryan watched them. He thought about 5 years of building walls and calling them protection. He thought about a woman who had waited not passively, not without cost, but with the particular strength of someone who knew her own value well enough not to accept a diminished version of being loved. He thought about a cardboard bridge on a bookshelf and a kitchen cabinet hinge, and a note that said, "Don't thank me, it was aggravating me." I thought about what Natalie had said on that first Saturday morning in her kitchen, in her sweatpants with her unfinished braid. "I will not become the woman you choose, only when the alcohol outruns your fear." He had heard that sentence as a condition. He understood now that it was a gift, the most honest gift anyone had ever given him. The gift of being told exactly what love required before he destroyed it, trying to hold it the wrong way. He had held it the right way. It had held back. Sophie pulled away from Natalie and looked at the ring. "Can I see it?" she said. Natalie held out her hand. She had put it on without ceremony while Ryan was watching Sophie. And Sophie studied it with the seriousness of an appraiser. "It's perfect," Sophie pronounced. "Yes," Natalie said. "It is." They got married 4 months later on a Saturday in early March outside Charlotte at a venue Carol had found that had a covered garden and string lights, and enough space for the exact number of people Ryan and Natalie had agreed on, which was not many. Sandra came. Marcus came and cried, which he denied loudly, and which everyone witnessed clearly. Carol gave a toast that was approximately 40% affectionate and 60% accurate documentation of Ryan's years of obliviousness, which Ryan accepted with the grace of a man who had been told by his sister she was saving material. Natalie wore a different dress from the emerald one. She wore ivory. She looked like herself, not a version of herself optimized for an occasion, just herself, the way she looked every day on purpose and without apology. Ryan looked at her walking toward him and thought, "I am going to remember this." He was completely sober. He remembered everything. Natalie kept her career. She was promoted to Director of Procurement Strategy 8 months after the wedding, which Sandra announced to the department with the particular satisfaction of someone who had watched a correct outcome arrive exactly when it should. Ryan continued as Regional Operations Director. He traveled on Tuesdays and alternate Thursdays. He called during as Sophie had required. He came home. Sophie turned 10, then 11. Then began a phase of interest in structural engineering that Ryan suspected had something to do with the fact that the one adult in her life who had ever treated her cardboard bridge as a legitimate engineering project was now a permanent fixture at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings. The cardboard bridge stayed on Sophie's shelf. Natalie moved in on a Saturday in June, 14 months after the Sunday morning proposal. She had kept her apartment until then, her choice, her timeline, her version of making sure the thing was real before she reorganized her life around it. Ryan had not pressured the timeline. He had waited with the patience of a man who had learned that loving someone meant trusting them to know when they were ready. The day she moved in, Sophie helped carry boxes with the focused energy of someone engaged in important work. Natalie's books went on the shelves in the study. Her coffee things went in the cabinet where they had already been living for 6 months because she was always there in the mornings anyway. At the end of the day, when the boxes were emptied and Sophie was asleep and the house was quiet, Ryan and Natalie sat in the kitchen with coffee. Natalie looked around the kitchen. Ryan looked at her. "This is your home," he said. Not as a declaration, as an acknowledgement of something already true. She looked at him. "It is," she said. "Simple. Complete." He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. Outside. Charlotte moved through its ordinary Saturday evening. Somewhere across the city, the Ballantine Hotel was lit up for another event, another company gathering, another collection of people navigating the complicated machinery of being human in proximity to each other. Ryan thought about that ballroom sometimes not with shame anymore, but with the particular tenderness reserved for the moment you almost missed the thing that turned out to matter most. He had stood on a chair. He had told the truth, loudly, drunkenly, publicly, and without memory. And then slowly, imperfectly, with wrong sentences and bad timing, and one genuinely terrible moment in a conference room, he had told it again. The right way. Quietly. With his whole self present. He had learned that the drunk confession hadn't been the proof of his love. It had only been the exposure of it. The proof came afterward. in the asking instead of assuming, in the childcare plan built without Natalie's name in it, in the procurement restructuring submitted without credit claimed, in the camp chair beside his at the baseball tournament, in the cabinet hinge fixed without being asked, in the Sunday mornings, in the patience, in the trust extended carefully earned slowly and held without conditions. The proof was every ordinary day they had built together, without drama, without sacrifice, disguised as love, without either of them becoming smaller than they actually were. Natalie squeezed his hand. He looked at her. She was smiling. Not the professional smile, not the composed smile. The real one, the one that had always been there underneath everything. Careful, waiting for a man who was finally paying attention, finally present, finally unafraid. The one that meant here. This. Us. Ryan Walker, 37 years old. Regional Operations Director, and father and husband and man who had spent 5 years building walls and 1 year learning to take them down. Looked at his wife across his kitchen table on a Saturday night in Charlotte, North Carolina, and understood that this was the thing he had been protecting himself from. Not loss, not grief. This. The size of how much he loved it. He had been afraid of exactly the right thing, and he had chosen it anyway. That was the whole story. That was all of it. That was enough.